Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. India, the world's second largest producer of wheat, has just announced that it will be taking steps to restrict its exports of this critical grain. This may not come as a huge surprise to those of you who have been watching this channel, but it did come as a surprise to markets, and as soon as this announcement was made, the price of wheat spiked up to all-time record highs. This is just the most recent case of food protectionism and rising food costs around the world, and it's not likely to be the last. A combination of extreme weather, fertilizer shortages, and rising input costs is contributing to a developing food crisis, one that is likely to become much worse in the months to come. Not only will this make it more difficult for people around the world to meet their basic needs, it will also have serious implications for the US and global economy, commodities, precious metals like gold and silver, and possibly even the maintenance of civil order and the rule of law. And that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. So, let's get to it. So, over the weekend, India announced that it would be banning the export of wheat. And this is pretty significant because India is the world's second largest producer of wheat. Now, they're not the largest exporter because they do consume a lot of their wheat domestically, but they are nonetheless a major contributor to wheat production worldwide. And they've claimed that this isn't a total ban. They say that they'll still be making shipments to countries whose food security depends on Indian wheat at the request of their government, but it doesn't seem like there was a lot of clarity on how many exceptions to this ban there would be, and I suspect it's going to be a relatively small number. That's just kind of a way for them to save some face because, as you all know, if you've been following this food shortage story, a lot of the world's wheat production, it comes out of Ukraine and Russia, and those wheat supplies are not going to be as available as they have been in the past, and so the price of foodstuffs has been moving up. And India was supposed to be one of these countries that would sort of take over and pick up some of the slack and produce even more food to export. But it looks like that's not going to be the case because India has been hit by this massive heat wave. Parts of the country are getting up to 122 degrees Fahrenheit for prolonged periods of time. And, obviously that makes farming fairly challenging. And there's speculation that the wheat harvests in India are going to be cut by up to 50% in some areas. So this heat wave is having a very significant impact on India's ability to grow food. And we can take a look here at this list of the top 15 wheat exporters by country. This was in 2021. And you can see Russia is right up there in the number 1 spot, followed closely by the United States, Ukraine in the number 5 spot, and then India here at number 10. So much of the world's wheat production is now being threatened either by extreme weather or by geopolitical conflict. And one of the effects of this announcement that was made by the Indian government is that the price of wheat has jumped up to record highs. And here's this headline from Bloomberg: Wheat soars as India restricts exports. They mention just how tight the global supply must be for this spike up in prices to occur. And if we take a look at this weekly chart of the price of wheat, you can see just how significant that spike up was. Back on May 10th, last week, you could buy a bushel of wheat for under $1,100. And now today, after this big move up, if you want to go buy a bushel of wheat, you're going to pay about $1,258. So more than a 10% move up in less than a week. And if we zoom out to this 25-year chart, you can see that now we are at all-time highs. Previous all-time high back in 2008, just under $1,100. And then in 2011, you can see that the price of wheat had another little spike up to about $855. And that was when we had the whole Arab Spring thing. And a lot of that was attributed to rising food prices. So, if we started to see unrest and revolts when the price of wheat was at $855, now we're at $1,263, it looks like right now. So it's a big move up, and it's something to be concerned about. There's sort of a confluence of factors, a perfect storm, if you will, that is driving up the price of many foodstuffs, wheat included. Here's some data from the St. Louis Fed. It is the producer price index for pesticide and other agricultural chemical manufacturing. And so this chart basically represents what it costs for manufacturers. Think, Monsanto, Dow, all these chemical companies that make the agricultural inputs that we depend on. And you can see that their costs have risen significantly, and this is largely due to inflation and also supply chain disruptions, they're going to pass these added costs on to their customers, the farmers, who then have to raise the price of food in order to make farming profitable. And farming today, agriculture, is extremely dependent on all of these inputs because what farming has become, they've killed all of the soil. It's really no longer soil being a living component in a ecosystem that you can grow food in. Instead, they've basically turned it into dirt, which is just sort of a matrix where you put in seeds and you inject some chemical fertilizers and you spray a bunch of pesticides and a bunch of herbicides and food comes up. And, it is a very efficient way to make a lot of calories in a small amount of space. The problem is that agriculture has become incredibly dependent on these chemicals, so as they rise in price, they have no choice but to pay the higher prices. There really is no alternative way of producing enough food to feed all of us. And again, here is another example of rising input costs for agriculture. This is the Green Markets North America Fertilizer Price Index, and this just kind of is a broad measure of the cost of fertilizer across North America. And you can see that we have moved up. We've come back a little bit from the high that we hit back in March, but still fertilizer at a very, very elevated price compared to it was just a few years ago. Right now, their index is around 1,018. And if you go back just to 2020 in June, it was around 308. So the price of fertilizer more than tripling in a 2-year period. So that is also putting a lot of upward pressure on the price of food. If you're enjoying this video so far, please do give it a big thumbs up down below. And when you finish the video, check out today's video sponsor, Silver Botanicals, personal hygiene and household products that utilize the power of nano silver. There's a link down in the description, and don't forget to use coupon code STACKER to save 10% off your order. And I've been covering the potential rise in food prices here on the channel for a couple months now, but it's not just me and other YouTubers who are warning about this. Remember back in March, the president also said that food shortages were going to be real, and this is one that it looks like he actually got right, as that forecast is coming true as we speak. And it's not just the president. Just a few weeks ago, the CEO of Goya warned that the world is on the brink of a food crisis. And, CEO of one of the world's largest food companies has some idea of what the supply situation is like. And India has actually caught some flack for this ban. Some of the G7 agriculture ministers have criticized their decision to stop wheat exports. This report from the Hindustan Times quotes the German agriculture minister as saying, if everyone starts to impose restrictions or to close markets, that would worsen the crisis. And yeah, that's probably exactly what's going to happen. And, there is some merit to this criticism, and not just from the viewpoint of countries that depend on wheat grown in India, but also for Indian farmers, for example, because this was actually, a positive for farmers that were successfully producing wheat, because the rising price of wheat globally and the increased amount of exports going out of India meant that they were able to make more profits from the wheat that they were growing. And ultimately, these rising food prices, if Indian exports were to continue, it would incentivize farmers there to grow more wheat. But now, because those farmers are not going to be able to sell their wheat on the global markets and realize those increased profits, they're not going to be as incentivized to grow more. So maybe now they'll choose to grow something else that they are allowed to export. Perhaps they won't want to take the risk of growing wheat because, the profit motive is not there. So that's the problem with these government interventions. They tend to ultimately exacerbate the problems. But, they also don't really have a whole lot of choice, unfortunately, because just look at what is happening in Sri Lanka. The last I read, the homes of more than 50 politicians had been burned down by protesters and rioters who are rioting over the rising food prices. And, India's got 1.2 billion people in it, so they've got a lot of hungry mouths to feed. If the politicians don't want to wake up surrounded by angry mobs with pitchforks and torches, they have got to make it at least appear that they are doing something to combat rising domestic food prices. And it's not just in Sri Lanka. Last month we saw deadly protests in Peru over rising food prices, and civil unrest around the world is likely to continue to worsen as this food crisis moves forward. And that leads us to how this food crisis could potentially impact the global economy and the US economy and other commodities and precious metals. And that has less to do with the food shortage itself and more to do with what the potential government reaction could be in the US to rising food prices. We haven't really gotten the worst of this yet because so far the dollar has been strengthening with the sell off we've been seeing lately in assets, and there's been a flight to safety to the dollar. So, food prices haven't shot up here quite as much as they have around the world. Although, if you go to the grocery store, you're still going to be paying a lot more than you were last year or the year before. Inflation is marching along in the US, there's no doubt about that. But when this food crisis really kicks off and large numbers of people are unable to feed themselves, I have a strong suspicion that we may be seeing some significant government intervention, and I don't think that that's just going to be in the form of food protectionism. I suspect that if the food crisis worsens to the point that a large number of Americans are unable to afford the basic necessities of life, we may very well see the advent of something like a central bank digital currency and universal basic income. Right around the time that the president was making that warning of potential food crises, he also signed an executive order on investigating how we could use a central bank digital currency in the US. And the Fed has been actively working on this, since that executive order was signed, yes, but even before that, for years, there has been talk of a Fed coin or a central bank digital currency. And of course, the Fed loves the idea of a currency that could be centrally controlled and, it would allow them to fine tune their central planning of the economy, which they think is, beneficial and the panacea to all sorts of problems, including a food crisis. And if that happens, if we do get a central bank digital currency, if we do get UBI, if we do get, the typical government response in the US, which is to throw money at a problem, then more than likely, one, it could exacerbate the food crisis because it means that food prices will be moving significantly higher if we throw money at a very limited resource. More and more fiat currency chasing the same number of resources will drive the price up. But also that will have an effect on commodities across the board, including precious metals. So, now I think is a good time to be getting prepared in multiple ways. None of this is financial advice, of course. Time to get out of digital and fiat and paper assets and into hard currency like gold and silver, and also a good time to stock up on food because it may be that the can of beans or the bag of rice that you buy today may have a better ROI than just about any other asset in the very near future. And you got to buy food anyway, so I don't know how many of you think it's going to get cheaper moving forward, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I think food is going to continue to just get more and more expensive. Stocking up now is going to allow you to get your food at a lower price, and in the future, it might not just be that there's high prices. Food may not be available at all, or certain foods. We produce a lot of food in the US, so I doubt very much that we're going to have true famine here. But that doesn't mean that food isn't going to be a lot more expensive and a lot more limited in what is available. So good time to get stocked up on food. Good time to plant a garden also, to learn how to produce some of your own fresh food. And I'd love to know what you're doing to get prepared for the coming food shortages. Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you all very much for watching. Stay safe and happy stacking. I'll catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker, out.